Ed Buck had a fetish for young black men and methamphetamines. He would often invite young men up to his West Hollywood apartment, where he would entice them into a drug-fueled session that sometimes lasted for days. On two separate occasions, these sessions ended in death. When a third surviving man agreed to cooperate with the police, the private life of a wealthy, politically connected predator would finally be exposed. Thanks for joining me for The Wicked and Cruel Crimes of Ed Buck. Beginning in 2011 through the end of 2019, Ed Buck used dating apps, escort services, and procurers to find a steady stream of homeless, drug-addicted, financially insecure, and otherwise vulnerable, often young black men, who he would supply drugs to or money in exchange for being filmed, while being injected with methamphetamines, sometimes against their will. Friends say that sometime in late 2016 or early 2017, Jamel Moore was approached by Ed Buck on an escort site. Friends say that Moore ignored Buck's advances, but that he was eventually persuaded by one of his other escort friends that the two of them should meet Buck at his apartment. The deal was that Moore wouldn't have to do anything but talk to Buck, and he'd get $600. From everything I read and can gather, Jamel Moore didn't do intravenous drugs before he met Ed Buck, and from what I've read, Buck must have salivated at the prospect of having a virgin meth user in his hands. At some point, Jamel Moore gave in to the lure of money, or maybe his own temptation at the prospect of experimenting with drugs, and he became a meth addict at the hands of Ed Buck. And he seemed to go downhill rapidly. Moore was a member of Los Angeles' ballroom community. He used the name Jules Carter. His friends say that his addiction and erratic behavior became so problematic that he was asked to leave the house that he was living in with other ballroom members. Even though he was close to his mother and his family, apparently he didn't want to leave Los Angeles, and so he wound up being taken in by Ed Buck. Jamel Moore kept a diary where he recorded his descent into addiction and degradation. Buck would often smoke while injecting his victims with methamphetamines, and while high and unconscious or semi-unconscious, he would pepper his conversations with racial epithets and other demeaning language to degrade his victims. In one filmed exchange, Moore is wearing white underwear, Buck is smoking meth and blowing it into a plastic pipe that goes into the underwear Moore is wearing. In another video, we hear Moore demanding to know what it is he's being injected with. The question angers Buck, and we hear him angrily telling Moore he doesn't have the right to interrogate Buck about what he's doing. In an effort to escape Los Angeles and Ed Buck, Jamel Moore flew back to his family in Spring, Texas, but Buck kept reaching out to him and offering to fly him back to Los Angeles. And on July 27, 2017, Moore flew back into town, making his way to Buck's West Hollywood apartment, where he would die, just as feared, in the clutches of Ed Buck. In a chilling artifact of Moore's death, there was a video from the apartment that shows Moore's body being removed by the paramedics, while another young black man tries to make his way up to Ed Buck's apartment. The police had to stop him and tell him the apartment was a no-go zone. If the police had looked through Jamel Moore's belongings, they would have found a notebook that was turned to the page that outlined his descent into drug addiction and death. This is the last page of those thoughts. He writes, "I just hope the end result isn't death. Someone needs to save me soon. The only person in my corner is the person who turned me this way. The way I feel right now, honestly, I don't care to live this life anymore. I do want to die. I feel like I've done way too much that this life allows. If it didn't hurt so much, I'd kill myself. But I'll let Ed Buck do it for now. December 3rd, 2016. I miss my grandma." After Jamel Moore's death, and with public demands for justice on the rise, Ed Buck reached out to Timothy Dean in the hopes that he would speak up for him publicly. According to Dean's friends, when they told him that he was thinking about meeting up with Ed Buck, they warned him to stay away. One friend reminded him that he had told him in the past that Ed Buck was the devil. 55-year-old Timothy Michael Dean moved to California in 2002. earned an AA degree from Santa Monica College in 2015. According to friends, in December of 2018, Dean was looking forward to the new year, so it was a shock when the calls began to circulate on January 7, 2019, that Dean was dead. Like Jamel Moore, Dean had found himself drawn once again into Ed Buck's web of drugs and cruelty. Just as he had with Jamel Moore, Buck told EMT workers that he and Dean were watching television. He went to take a shower, Buck did, and when he came out of the shower, Dean had overdosed on drugs, which he didn't know that Dean had with him. And as with Moore, Timothy Dean's death was ruled an accidental overdose. Later, it would be discovered that Ed Buck had waited 15 minutes before he even called 911. After Dean's death, the spotlight became even brighter on Buck's deadly activities. Questions about Buck's political influence began to be raised by family and friends of both men. Was Buck's wealth and political connections in the city keeping the DA's office from charging him with homicide? On September 4th, 2019, a 37-year-old Joe Doe, whose name was redacted in court records, went to Buck's apartment where he was injected with meth by Ed Buck. When he began to feel ill, he left and went to the emergency room. On September 11th, he went back to Buck's apartment where he was injected with 2 large amounts of meth. Buck attempted to keep Joe Doe from leaving his apartment, but Doe managed to escape and call 911. On September 17, 2019, Ed Buck was finally arrested. It may be tempting to look at Buck's crimes as merely the intersection of drug addiction and a wealthy man's ability to purchase an endless supply of drugs, resulting in accidental drug deaths. But the crimes of Ed Buck go so much further than that. Trial testimony made it clear that Ed Buck was a predator. At trial, the prosecution presented evidence of nearly 40,000 digital searches for drug-fueled sex scenarios called party and play and slamming, where drugs are injected in the process of people having sex. These were combined with messages between Buck and prospective dates or escorts offering drugs and money. There were also messages found between Buck and young men who told him that they weren't interested in drugs, and Buck would immediately cut them off. There was also evidence of online activity where Buck would often pay homeless men he'd had drug encounters with to recruit other black homeless men who they thought might be interested in being paid to be injected. At trial, there was a parade of 10 men who were witnesses to the activities of Ed Buck and their encounters with him. I'll share just 2. Victim number 6 testified that on February 19, 2019, just over a month after Timothy Dean had died in Buck's apartment, Buck approached him at an ATM in West Hollywood and invited him to his apartment to party and play. Victim number 6 was homeless and suffered with meth addiction. The man testified that Buck had a very controlled environment where guests had a station. Buck led him to believe that there were cameras everywhere. He told the court that he had to ask permission to go to the bathroom. He also said that all of the drug props were meticulously organized. Victim 6 testified that Buck gave him both meth and GHB, the date rape drug, and insisted on keeping him as high as possible. The man told the court that he stayed with Buck for a few days because of the drugs and because of the fact that he was homeless. He said over the next month, Buck injected him with meth 5 or 6 times. When he wanted to leave, Ed Buck got mad. He testified that Buck exerted control over him, saying it was like a power trip. When he did manage to leave, he got sober for the first time in years, which lasted 2.5 months. In May of 2019, when he relapsed, he reached out to Ed Buck. Buck had him come over and gave him so much meth that he testified he was on the edge of unconsciousness and overdose. He left Ed Buck's and never saw him again. Victim number 7 testified that he met Buck on a dating site. Buck asked him about his drug use and his willingness to party and play. The witness agreed to meet and went to Buck's apartment. He said he was told to wear a gas mask with a tube coming out of it, but he couldn't breathe, so he took the mask off. He testified that Buck put on the mask and blew smoke from a meth pipe into a tube that went into his underwear supplied by Buck. Victim number 7 identified the red toolbox containing sex toys and drugs that Buck kept in his apartment. He said that Buck had injections ready and wanted to inject him immediately, saying Buck insisted that he do it. He wanted to do it from the get-go. Victim number 7 said he was floating in and out of consciousness, and when he would come to, Ed Buck would be choking or slapping him. He said that he stopped and caressed his face at one point. When victim number 7 finally came to, he said he woke up to Ed Buck coming at him with 2 needles, saying, "The party's just started." Victim number 7 said he reminded Buck of their agreement that he had to get ready to go to school. He said that he got nervous because Buck's attitude about him wanting to leave became frightening, so he texted a friend. And when Buck finally realized that he was going to leave, he slammed the money that he owed him for the encounter on the counter, and victim number 7 left the apartment. On December 15, 2018, victim number 7 returned to Ed Buck's apartment. The jury was shown messages from Buck saying, "Wanna join me in the clouds tonight? Just hitting on a pipe, wanna come by?" On that occasion, victim number 7 said that he was injected and collapsed almost immediately. He was out for 5 or 6 hours. During this time, he was aware of everything that was going on, saying my eyes were open, I could hear, I couldn't lift my fingers, I couldn't move my tongue, I couldn't move anything. At some stage, Ed Buck emerged from a closet with a chainsaw. Victim number 7 remembered the sound was so loud that it really frightened him, but nothing happened after that. At the end of this encounter, Ed Buck refused to pay him. He phoned someone else, another man, to come to the apartment to get victim number 7 to leave. This was a practice that Ed Buck did regularly when things didn't go his way. He would either call the police or he'd call someone to act as muscle to remove the person from his apartment. Victim number 7 told the jury that he did eventually get paid $300 by Buck. Before victim number 7 could meet up with Buck again, he got word that Timothy Dean had died in Buck's apartment, even though Buck tried continually to persuade him to come back for another session. He never saw Buck again. Ed Buck's defense attorney was Christopher Darden. Darden worked as a prosecutor in the O.J. Simpson trial. Darden is now in private practice, and Buck hired his firm to defend him in this case. The defense was rather Victorian. When cross-examining victim number 7, Darden made a special point of asking several times some version of, "You're a sex worker, right? You sell sex, is that correct?" In one of the worst cases of dirtying up the deceased, Darden labored over the fact that Jamil Moore's real cause of death was his HIV status, despite the report from the coroner's office. Moore was, in fact, HIV positive, but then again, so was his meth-smoking, meth-pushing client, Ed Buck. On July 27, 2021, Ed Buck was found guilty of 2 counts of distribution of methamphetamines resulting in death, 4 counts of distribution of methamphetamines, 1 count of maintaining a drug-involved premises, and 2 counts of enticement to travel in interstate commerce for prostitution. These were all federal charges because the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office felt that they needed more evidence, or rather that the bar was higher for them to get a conviction locally because of changing laws about drug possession and so on. When asked about the conviction, Letitia Nixon, Jamil Moore's mother, said that she was glad that Buck had been convicted, but she was still angry that it had taken so long to bring Buck to justice. She made the point that other supporters made, which is that if the LA District Attorney's Office had arrested Buck sooner, Timothy Dean might have still been alive. You cannot talk about this case without mentioning Jasmyne Cannick. She is a journalist and an activist and altogether a superwoman who functioned as a clearinghouse for document collection and witnesses. I think almost everyone would agree, without her doggedness, Ed Buck might still be walking the streets today. One of the aspects of the true crime genre that really holds my interest is my fascination with human behavior, why we do the things we do. Ed Buck was born into a fairly average family life. He bought a business that was going bankrupt that made him a millionaire when he sold it. He was politically active and socially minded. But as he descended into his own meth addiction, this aspect of his personality came out. But here's the question. Why did Ed Buck decide to use his money and his power in the way that he did? Why did his Empathetic impulses stop at the water's edge of other people's vulnerability. It's a rhetorical question, really, because we'll never know. Some on social media claimed that Jamel Moore's struggles were exacerbated by the fact that his family had rejected him over his sexuality. But according to family and friends, nothing could be further from the truth. His mother said that when he finally came out, she laughed and said, "Yes, I know. Now what?" She says that she told him she was waiting for him to come out to her, to be ready. When he moved to Los Angeles, he wasn't able to go home to visit his family as often as he would have liked. His mother did come to visit him, and they spent some good, intimate time together. And from the photographs I've seen, they had a good, loving connection, and the mother is just beaming. It's obvious that she just adores her son. In the documentary Jamel and Tim, one of Moore's friends said that he would hate all of this attention about this part of his life because he was really private. He was loved by his community and his family, and his story is such a powerful warning about what can happen when a lack of self-love and awareness collides with a dark force more than willing to exploit those vulnerabilities. Timothy Dean's 3 sisters loved and adored him, but it sounds like Dean struggled to find his feet. By moving to Los Angeles, it does seem that he finally found a family and some grounding where he could truly be himself, but he also found addiction. One of the phantoms and unknowns, particularly for people who don't do drugs, is how drug addiction is able to rear its ugly head and to tempt and taunt you back into something that you know can kill you. The story of Ed Buck and the men who crossed his path can be easily compartmentalized into a story about drug addicts, or as an extreme example of the dehumanizing fetishization of the black male body in gay culture. It can even be dismissed as a story about a bunch of homeless dope fiends who met their inevitable end. For me, it is much more than that. Many of us live in cities and towns where there is homelessness and drug addiction. Many of us have personal experiences with someone struggling with recovery. This problem is a growing problem across the United States, and it's a huge problem in the gay community, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this story, because it's so seldom talked about. Wherever you stand on a checkerboard when it comes to these sorts of experiences, it seems to me that empathy and compassion are fundamental to our survival, not just as a community, but as a human species. The fact that Dean and Moore's family and friends had to remind people in LA County that their lives mattered is a little depressing, but it's also life-affirming because it worked. The work of Jasmyne Cannick is awe-inspiring. If you'd like to learn more about the crimes of Ed Buck or about his victims, including the astonishing array of drug stuff the police found when they finally searched his apartment, which led to federal charges of running a drug house, you can find those links to those documents in the link below. If you or anyone you know is struggling with addiction, please use the resources listed in the description. Finally, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.